Hey guys, tonight we drift far into the Arctic, into a foggy expanse where maps once swore there was land, and ships sailed toward it with confidence. You're aboard a wooden vessel, the creak of timbers beneath you, the frozen wind slicing your cheeks like paper. The sea is a patchwork of black and white, open water and jagged ice, and ahead, somewhere on the horizon, is an island that does not, and never did, exist. You're looking for Frisland. This island, complete with mountains, bays and even towns, was printed on maps for more than 300 years. Entire voyages were planned around it. Letters were sent about it. Territories were claimed over it. And all of it was based on a mistake, one that somehow refused to die. Of course, you probably won't survive this voyage. Your boots are wet. Your beard, if you have one, is encrusted with salt. You're chasing a myth through sub-zero fog in a boat made from trees. But don't worry, you're not alone. Half of Europe once thought Frisland was real too. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is. Drop that in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're aboard a Dutch whaling ship in the late 1600s. The sails snap overhead. There's salted herring in a barrel and some very questionable bread. The captain has a beard that could store secrets. He pulls out a map, hand-drawn, slightly wrinkled, probably copied from a dozen others. There it is, Frisland, a sizable chunk of land just southwest of Iceland, floating like a breadcrumb in the North Atlantic. You squint toward the horizon, just ice and gulls, but your captain insists. He's seen it, or his uncle did, or maybe his cousin's friend. Either way, the map says it's there. And when maps say something in the 1600s, people believe it. Frisland first popped onto nautical charts in the 1500s, courtesy of a Venetian nobleman named Niccolo Zeno. According to him, he and his brother embarked on a series of voyages through the North Atlantic. Somewhere out there, possibly around the Faroe Islands or west of Iceland, they claimed to have discovered an island called Frisland. They wrote letters, sketched coastlines, and made it seem quite convincing. Here's where things get weird. Most historians now agree that the Zeno letters were probably made up. They may have been written decades after the supposed voyages. Some scholars even suspect Niccolo's descendant, also named Niccolo, may have forged them entirely. Why? Possibly to boost Venetian pride. Possibly because he was bored. Possibly because the Renaissance was a time when making up stuff and calling it exploration was basically a sport. Still, these forged or mistaken documents found their way into atlases all over Europe. Even the great cartographer Gerardus Mercator included Frisland in his famous 1569 world map. Once it's on a Mercator map, you better believe it's gospel. Sailors would see it and assume the island was simply obscured by fog or ice that day. After all, you can't always see land, even when you're right next to it. Maybe you just missed it. Maybe it was too dark. Or maybe, as some sailors swore, it vanished behind a wall of mist. One fringe theory, likely concocted over a few too many pints, suggests Frisland was a floating island of ice, drifting with the currents, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. This same theory has been used for centuries to explain everything from disappearing ships to lost civilizations. It doesn't hold up under scrutiny, but it's definitely the kind of story a sailor would shout across a tavern table, waving his hands for emphasis and accidentally knocking over someone's beer. Historians still argue whether Frisland was a total fabrication or a misidentification of a real landmass, perhaps part of Greenland or one of the Faroe Islands. The sketchiness of early navigation means it's possible a real island was mistaken, copied, recopied and exaggerated until it became a separate land entirely. The Renaissance wasn't great at quality control. Meanwhile, back on the ship, your captain still has faith. He squints at the clouds and says something cryptic about land spirits. One sailor swears he saw a mountain peak yesterday. Another points to a puff of fog and calls it a peninsula. You just pull your blanket tighter, hoping tonight's rations include more than dried peas. The night falls. The stars overhead are bright but confusing. No GPS. just hopeful glances at constellations. You lie on deck, the sea rocking beneath you, and wonder how many people throughout history have chased dreams drawn in ink, across oceans they barely understood, toward islands that were never there. The island of Frisland didn't just appear on a few sketchy maps, it became a geographic celebrity. Once it entered the cartographic bloodstream, it spread like gossip in a small town. One mapmaker copied from another, each one adjusting the coastline a little, adding rivers, mountains, even cities with suspiciously Italian-sounding names. By the 1600s, Frisland was not only accepted as real, it had postal service and architecture, at least on paper. You're now in the study of a Venetian nobleman, Niccolo Zeno the Younger. His robes swish as he leans over a parchment, quill in hand. It's 1558, and he's publishing what he claims are letters and maps discovered in a dusty chest, documents written by his ancestors, who allegedly sailed to the far reaches of the North Atlantic in the 1380s. In these writings, they detail a network of islands, including Frisland, that most people in Europe had never heard of. The implication: the Zeno brothers got there long before Columbus. Bold move, and while many Renaissance scholars questioned the document's authenticity, the story was just juicy enough to believe. After all, Venice was no longer the cutting-edge maritime power it once was, a tale of heroic Venetian explorers discovering lands ahead of their time. That was catnip to the nostalgic upper crust. And so Frisland found a foothold. Cartographers across Europe began to include it in their maps, copying the Zeno layout like it was a family recipe. Over time, it took on a vaguely triangular shape, often shown just below Iceland, floating confidently in the cold. Some even gave it a capital city. There's something hilarious, and a little poetic, about mapmakers agreeing on imaginary urban planning. One historical fact that often gets overlooked: the Zeno map wasn't the first to include phantom landmasses. Medieval cartography was full of speculative geography. The island of St. Brendan, High Brazil, and even Antillia had their time in the spotlight. Some were based on sailor rumours, others on religious visions, and a few on the simple human inability to say, maybe I was wrong. You trudge through the archives of old map collections now, flipping pages that smell like dust and sea salt. The 1560s, the 1580s, the early 1600s, they all show Frisland. By now, it's not just a place, it's an expectation. The more maps that include it, the harder it is for anyone to say it doesn't exist. Scholars call this cartographic inertia, the tendency for mistakes to persist once they're widely accepted. Kind of like how the QWERTY keyboard stuck, even though more efficient layouts exist. One fringe theory, whispered in niche geography forums and late-night maritime podcasts, claims Frisland did exist, but sank, like Atlantis, but colder and with less marble. There's zero geological evidence to support this, but it's fun to imagine, a lonely island burdened by centuries of belief, finally getting fed up and slipping into the sea out of spite. Historians still argue whether Niccolo Zeno the Younger meant for his map to be taken seriously. Some say it was part of a fictionalized history trend that was popular in Renaissance Italy. Others think he genuinely believed the stories he had pieced together. It's hard to say, but whatever his intention, the impact was undeniable. His map didn't just shape how Europeans viewed the Arctic, it rewrote the geography of the Northern Hemisphere for centuries. And then came the engravers. You're in a bustling print shop now, woodblock carvings piled high, the smell of ink thick in the air. A cartographer shouts across the room, "Do we add Frisland?" The engraver, without looking up, replies, "Of course we add Frisland." And just like that, the ghost island is copied into yet another edition. You imagine the first sailor who realised something was off, perhaps in the mid-1600s. He follows the map, passes Iceland, squints at the horizon, and there's nothing. Just water. He sails for days. His crew grows restless. Someone mutters about bad luck. The ship's cat stares accusingly. Eventually the sailor turns back, confused but unwilling to say anything that might get him laughed at in the next port. That's the power of a good mistake. It wraps itself in authority. And Frisland, crafted from one man's old family letters, had exactly the right mix of history, mystery, and cartographic appeal to endure. As night settles in again, you look up at the stars. Maybe one of them is named after something that never existed too. The universe, it turns out, has room for all kinds of fictions. You wake to frost on your eyebrows and the sound of a creaking rudder. The captain stands at the helm, muttering in Danish and glaring at the sea like it owes him money. You're still somewhere between Iceland and Greenland, which in these latitudes means you're between very cold and probably cursed. But none of that matters. What matters is the island, Frisland, still stubbornly not appearing. What's wild is how obsessed Europe became with claiming every speck of frozen rock in the Arctic. Whether real or imaginary, if it was on a map, someone wanted to stick a flag in it. The British, the Dutch, the Danes, even the Scots occasionally showed up with boats and bravado, all searching for new northern frontiers. If Frisland was even rumoured to be there, well, that was enough. During the Age of Discovery, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries, the Arctic was basically the oceanic version of a garage sale. Everyone saw something different, no one really knew what it was worth, and half the stuff didn't even exist. But that didn't stop the land rush. If you thought an island might be hiding behind the fog, you claimed it. You named it after your king or your grandmother, or, if you were Dutch, probably something practical like New Ice Island. Real historical fact. The British once claimed a non-existent island called Crockerland in 1906. An explorer named Robert Peary swore he saw it, marked it down, and decades later the US even funded expeditions to go find it. Spoiler, it was a mirage. So it wasn't just Renaissance guys getting fooled, this stuff lingered. Frisland got tangled in that fever. Its inclusion on Zeno's map gave it pedigree, and once Mercator added it, boom, it had clout. Subsequent atlases didn't dare contradict the greats, and in colonial Europe, not claiming a place that showed up on a map felt like negligence. There's something deeply human about this. We're pattern seekers. See a blotch of cloud, it's a continent. Spot a distant wave shaped like a peak. Must be land. Hear a story from a sailor who insists he saw a shoreline in the mist. Better draw it. Multiply this by generations of mapmakers, all copying each other, and suddenly you've got national navies dispatching ships to plant flags on phantoms. One fringe tidbit that floated around Arctic ports. Frisland was said to be rich in cod. Not gold, not spices. Code cold, smelly, abundant fish, which actually made it more appealing. Cod fueled economies. Cod meant food. Cod meant exports. So yes, people might have risked frostbite for ghostly fish. Historians still argue whether early expeditions that claimed to land on Frisland actually hit parts of Greenland, the Faroe Islands, or even the coast of Iceland and just got very confused. Some ships may have made landfall, assumed it was a new discovery, and jotted down Frisland in their logs, because the name was already circulating. It's the kind of feedback loop that only works when everyone's freezing, and cartography is an educated guess at best. You're standing now at a foggy rail, watching the ice shift around you like broken glass. One sailor beside you swears he can smell land. Another points at a cloud and says, "That's definitely a mountain." You nod sleepily. "Sure it is, buddy, sure it is." Back in Europe, the maps keep printing. Atlases in Amsterdam, Paris and London all show Frisland in more or less the same spot. Sometimes it has a jagged northern coast, sometimes it looks like a chicken wing, it changes names, gets neighbours, and occasionally merges with other nearby phantom islands. But it never goes away. For some, it's a real place waiting to be rediscovered. For others, it's a blank spot to fill in until someone says otherwise. And no one wants to say otherwise. Because to question Frisland is to question all the maps. And if the maps are wrong about one thing, how much else have they fudged? You head below deck now, curling into a pile of furs as the hull creaks around you. Somewhere out there in the cold, another ship is probably doing the same dance, following the same coordinates to nowhere, fueled by hope, rumour, and the enduring power of a beautiful mistake. You're back on deck, breath fogging the air, staring into a vast nothingness that somehow keeps promising everything. The captain has spread the map out on a barrel, and there it is again. Frisland, bold letters, clear coordinates, latitudes and longitudes as if someone had measured them with a ruler in a dream. And that's the thing, Frisland didn't just float around as a vague idea, it had precise coordinates. Over time, mapmakers started assigning it fixed positions, 60 degrees north, 40 degrees west, or close enough. The more they locked it down on paper, the more real it seemed. People trusted the lines. If the math checked out, the land had to be there. Of course it wasn't. But try telling that to a 17th century navigator staring at a compass, a quadrant, and a suspicious patch of fog. You know what's amazing? These coordinates weren't randomly invented. They were based on confirmed sightings, probably from sailors squinting at clouds, distant cliffs, or, in some cases, icebergs that just didn't drift for a few hours. Once a few navigators wrote down matching positions, the data began to snowball, like a lie that's been told enough times to gain a postcode. Real historical fact. The Dutch cartographer Willem Bleu, one of the most respected names in early mapmaking, included Frisland in several of his 17th century maps, complete with longitude and latitude. He even labelled cities on it. Not dots or villages, cities. Which is bold, considering no one ever built a single hut there. You crouch beside the map, finger tracing the edge of the phantom island. It has everything. Coves, capes, even little dots that look suspiciously like ports. Someone went through the trouble to invent not just the landmass, but its geography. It's like fan fiction for cartographers. Fringe detail? A few 17th century navigation manuals warned that Frisland might drift slightly depending on the season. An elegant way of saying, if you don't find it, it's probably your fault. That's peak passive-aggressive geography. Historians still argue whether the coordinates for Frisland were ever measured at all, or simply inherited from one unreliable chart to another. Some believe they were back-calculated from misidentified coastlines, then adjusted to make more sense over time. Others suggest they were pure fiction, but aligned conveniently with known sea routes, so they didn't raise suspicion. It's worth noting that in those centuries, longitude was incredibly hard to measure accurately. Before marine chronometers were invented in the 18th century, longitude was basically guesswork at sea. You could be off by hundreds of miles and not even know. So when sailors thought they'd passed near where Frisland should be, they didn't assume the island was fake. They assumed they'd missed it. Imagine that feeling. Sailing days through fog and sleet, staring at every white blur on the horizon, knowing that somewhere out here, on these exact coordinates, is a land you just can't seem to spot. It's like walking around a mall parking lot convinced your car is right there, because your GPS told you so. You lean over the rail now, scanning the endless grey. Somewhere below the water, a current churns quietly. The ice creaks as it shifts. The sky is a faded canvas. The world feels still, almost reverent, as if it too is waiting for Frisland to appear. But it won't. Still, the maps continue to say otherwise. This fictional island becomes not just a mistake, but a statement. Its coordinates etched into atlases, its name engraved on globes, its absence never quite enough to erase it. Down below deck, the crew argues. One sailor claims he did see land yesterday. A shadow, maybe a ridge. Another says the island only appears under certain celestial conditions. Someone else mutters that it's cursed. You just shake your head and pull your coat tighter. Belief, it turns out, is stronger than frostbite. Stronger than evidence. Strong enough to give an island a location, even if it was never really there. You awaken to shouting on deck, sailors jostling for a look, pointing toward a smudge on the horizon. "Land!" someone yells. You clamber up, boots slipping on frost-slicked steps, and squint into the distance. There, beyond the fog, a pale shape hovers where water meets sky. It could be Frisland. Except it's not, because what you're seeing is either an iceberg, a mirage, or maybe just the hopeful projections of men who've been at sea too long. But the moment is electric. People want it to be real. Some say they can see trees, others describe the slope of hills, even the glint of what might be a river mouth. This kind of group delusion, or more generously collective optimism, wasn't rare. There are documented cases of entire crews claiming to have seen land that simply wasn't there. It's called a fata morgana, a complex type of mirage caused by layers of warm and cold air bending light over the horizon. Sailors didn't know the science. They just knew they'd seen something, and some of them over the years claimed they'd landed on Frisland. Real historical fact. In the early 1600s, several captains recorded landings on what they believed was Frisland. One report mentions a rocky shore with steep cliffs and bird colonies. Another describes navigating a shallow harbour and collecting fresh water. Problem is, no two of these logs agree on location or description. It's like listening to 5 people describe a dream they had. Vivid, convincing, but hopelessly inconsistent. One quirky tidbit. A few of these phantom landings included friendly locals. Yes, Frisland apparently had people. Who spoke what language? No one recorded that. What did they eat? Unclear. But somewhere out there in the North Atlantic, according to a handful of sailors, was an entire civilization that never actually existed. You lean against the rail, arms crossed, watching the smudge dissolve as the sun rises higher. Whatever was out there has vanished. The captain sighs. Another sailor curses under his breath, but no one tears up the map. No one says maybe it's a mistake. Instead, they write in the log, Frisland sighted, conditions prevented landing. That's how legends stay alive. Historians still argue whether these sightings were genuine misidentifications of known islands, like the Faroe Islands, parts of Greenland, or even drifting sea ice. Some theories suggest sailors, desperate for success or praise, exaggerated their stories once they got back to port. After months at sea with little to show for it, inventing a successful discovery might have felt like survival. Or maybe they really thought they'd found it. After all, they had maps, logs, testimonies. Who were they to question? The thing is, maps lie beautifully. You imagine a cartographer back in Amsterdam or London hearing these stories. A sailor bursts in, reeking of salt and glory, slams a logbook down, and declares he's seen Frisland. The cartographer doesn't cross-reference. He just nods, pulls out a compass, and adds a new wrinkle to the coastline. Maybe a small inland lake, maybe a second port. The island grows richer in detail with every passing year, even though no one can prove it's there. Meanwhile, some mapmakers got creative. By the late 1600s, Frisland began to sprout towns. On some charts, it had roads. On others, rivers and forested hills. Each addition came from nowhere, pure invention, but the more elaborate the maps got, the more embarrassing it became to admit it might all be wrong. You curl into your coat as another wave splashes the hull. The horizon remains empty. The only thing drifting by now is a gull, lazy and unconcerned, as if it too is tired of hearing about this ghost island. And yet, if you'd been there in those years, with only fog and hope around you, would you have said anything different? Probably not, because sometimes the promise of land is more comforting than the truth of open water. The longer Frisland lingered on maps, the more customizable it became. Think of it like a geographical dress-up doll. Each cartographer gave it a little makeover. One decade it's shaped like a lopsided peanut. The next it looks like Italy if you squint and tilt your head. Some added mountain ranges. Others gave it inlets, rivers, even political subdivisions. It was like everyone knew it was fake, but decided to keep playing anyway. Like an inside joke the whole mapping world was in on, but no one wanted to spoil. You find yourself now hunched over a 1650s atlas in a dusty European library. The pages crackle as you turn them, and there it is again. Frisland. But this time it has a sister, a smaller island just off the eastern coast, maybe a Frisland minor. On another map, it's split in two, divided by a narrow channel as if tectonic drama had shaped it in silence. One cartographer gave it a rugged coastline full of fjords, another a perfectly circular bay in the centre, like someone poked it with a compass. One real historical fact: on a map by Vincenzo Coronelli in the late 1600s, Frisland is shown alongside Greenland and Iceland, but bigger, bolder and labelled with cities. That's right, cities. Some even had names. Sodri, Argentea and Silefa were among them. These weren't just marks on a map anymore. They were imagined communities, places people could picture. It's like a Pinterest board for a place that didn't exist. And the weirder it got, the more persistent it became, because once Frisland had features, once people started improving it, removing it meant erasing not just a landmass, but an entire fantasy. Scholars call this accumulated error inertia. The more detail you invent, the harder it becomes to walk it all back without looking foolish. Fringe tidbit. One 17th century French map showed Frisland having a volcano. A volcano in the icy North Atlantic. No explanation, no eruption timeline, just a dark little cone ominously drawn near the centre. You have to admire the audacity. Historians still argue whether the evolution of Frisland's design was based on actual misreadings of the sea, or if it was just cartographers competing to make the prettiest fake island. Some believe it became a kind of professional flex. Oh, your Frisland only has one city. Mine has a river system and a mountain range. Amateurs. But not everyone treated Frisland with blind faith. Some maps began to hedge. A few labelled it as Frisland, with a question mark, the cartographic equivalent of a shrug. Others started to shrink it, pushing it further south or northwest, tucking it behind ice shelves or blending it into Greenland's coastline. One even noted, said to exist by some, unconfirmed by others. That's as close as the 17th century got to a fact check. Still, most mapmakers doubled down. You imagine the conversations. Do we still include Frisland? Well, we did last edition. But it's probably not real. Neither is half of California, and we're drawing that as an island. Fair point. As you watch the sea from your imagined ship, you picture Frisland not as a landmass, but as a floating idea, shifting and morphing, refusing to die. In this foggy theatre of belief, it performs for every sailor desperate to find it, and every mapmaker too proud to admit they never really knew what they were doing. The sky darkens again. A soft snow begins to fall, silent, slow, indifferent to mistakes. You tuck your arms into your coat and stare at the horizon, half expecting it to rise into the jagged silhouette of a volcano-capped island, with glowing windows and friendly fictional townspeople. It won't. But somewhere in the back of your mind, the map still whispers that it should. The year is 1707, and you're in Copenhagen, sipping something warm and vaguely fish-flavoured, while Danish officials argue around a large oak table. The topic? Frisland. More specifically, whether Denmark should formally claim it. Because of course, what's a good colonial project without annexing something you've never seen? Denmark, like many European powers at the time, was on a bit of a polar binge. They already had Iceland, they had Greenland, or at least the parts they could stand being on, and now Frisland, hanging temptingly on the edge of their charts, seemed ripe for the picking. It didn't matter that no Danish expedition had ever set foot on it. The maps showed it, the coordinates were there, and no one else had officially claimed it yet, so they did. Real historical fact. In several royal cartographic records from the 18th century, Frisland appears shaded or bordered in a way that implies Danish control. There was no war, no treaty, no landing ceremony with a flag and a shaky toast. It was just ink, a silent claim, like stealing a chair in a theatre by draping a coat over it. Fringe tidbit. A satirical pamphlet in 1721 mocked Denmark's growing empire, by including Frisland on a fictional list of territories soon to be discovered and mildly disappointing. The humour was probably too subtle to spark a rebellion, but it hints at how the smarter folks were beginning to smell something fishy. Historians still argue whether Denmark's claim was serious geopolitics, or just a case of following the herd. Did they actually believe Frisland was real? Or were they playing a bigger game, staking flags on everything drawn on a map just in case it turned out to be valuable? If you don't plant your flag and someone else does, you lose face. If you do plant it, and the island vanishes. Just blame the cartographer. Easy. You now find yourself in a drafty chamber of the Royal Danish Academy. Scholars pore over atlases, candles flickering as one proposes a new expedition. Let's find Frisland, he says. There's a murmur of agreement. After all, think of the prestige, the science, the potential trade routes, and the herring. Always the herring. The expedition never happens, not really. Funding dries up. Ships are diverted. The weather turns. Frisland yet again slips back into foggy abstraction. But the claim stays. Quiet. Almost ceremonial. Denmark has added a ghost to its collection. On the sea, your imagined ship now flies a Danish flag. The crew is half convinced that they'll land by morning. The captain has read the latest Copenhagen documents and feels oddly patriotic about it. You, wrapped in 3 layers of wool and regret, just hope there's something out there besides wet wind. In the galley, a young sailor asks if Frisland has trees. Another wants to know if it has bears. Someone else wonders aloud whether it might have women. A long pause. Then laughter. Tired, half-delirious laughter. Because at this point, Frisland could have anything, or nothing. It could be an icy paradise, or an elaborate joke no one wants to admit they fell for. You picture Denmark's coat of arms, freshly redesigned to include a tiny invisible island, an empire built partly on mist, and somewhere, back in a map shop in Oslo or Hamburg, a new atlas is being engraved. The cartographer leans in close, squinting, and carefully traces the outline of Frisland once again. Because whether it's real or not, people are still looking. As you drift through another cold morning aboard your mental ship, the fog clings to the water, like spilled milk over black velvet. The sails sag with frost. No one talks much anymore. Even the captain has stopped squinting at the horizon. Instead, someone unrolls a different map. One with a similar problem. A different ghost. Meet Bus Island. It's like Frisland had a cousin. Same family, slightly different personality. Bus Island was the shy sibling. Less famous, but just as imaginary. It didn't get the same luxurious upgrades, no volcanoes or city names, but it was a firm part of the North Atlantic's increasingly cluttered map. You pass your gloved hands over a nautical chart from the 1600s. There they are, Frisland and Bus, sometimes near each other, sometimes miles apart, depending on which cartographer had the stronger coffee. In a few maps they almost overlap. 2 errors that nearly collided. A cartographic traffic jam. Quirky detail. Some later maps gave Bus Island a twin. North Bus and South Bus. Because if you can't find one fake island, why not invent a second to explain the first? You almost have to admire the optimism. Historians still argue whether Bus Island sightings were confused reports of Greenland's eastern coast, drifting icebergs, or the result of exhausted sailors seeing what they hoped for instead of what was really there. A few even suggest early explorers deliberately found new islands to secure funding for future voyages. It's easier to get money for a treasure hunt than a fishing trip. On your ship, the crew now murmurs about Bus as if it were a side quest. Maybe we missed Frisland, someone says. Let's try Bus next. They change direction by a few degrees. The compass needle twitches. Another round of frozen bread is passed around. It tastes like despair. This is what the North Atlantic became in the 16th and 17th centuries. A board game with half the pieces missing and no official rulebook. Islands popped in and out of existence like flickering stars. What mattered wasn't whether they were real, but whether people acted like they were. Frisland and Bus. 2 ghost islands, haunting the same sea, dragging belief and error behind them like kelp on a keel. Sometimes drawn together, sometimes apart, they represent the same cartographic craving, to make the unknown known, to fill blank spaces with possibility, even when the possibility turns out to be nothing more than fog and wishful thinking. As you huddle against the cold, the idea strikes you. How many times has someone set out toward a dream and ended up on a myth? How many captains followed dotted lines to nowhere and convinced themselves they'd still succeeded? The fog lifts for a moment, just enough to reveal nothing. Still no Frisland, still no Bus. Just the soft splash of sea against wood, the breath of wind in frozen sails, and the stubborn belief that something is just over the horizon. You've been staring at the sea so long it starts to look like land. Every wave crest becomes a mountain. Every shadow becomes a bay. It's easy to understand how this whole mess got started. Back then, nobody had radar, no sonar, no satellites quietly judging your coordinates from orbit. Navigation was sun, stars, guesswork, and a prayer. And when the fog rolled in, which, up here, it always did, you might as well have been sailing on spilled ink. Frisland was born in this ink, and while we've traced its evolution on maps and in myth, the one thing still bothering historians is this. What was the first thing they actually saw? The supposed first sighting. That moment that triggered everything. Was it real land misidentified? Was it a mirage like Bus Island? Or was it a story entirely made up that got taken too seriously by someone with access to a printing press? Real historical fact? Some scholars believe the original Frisland sighting may have been a distorted view of the Faroe Islands. On a foggy day, with poor visibility and high hopes, a cluster of pharaohs could absolutely look like one large mass, especially if you're sleep-deprived, freezing, and not entirely clear on where you are. There's also speculation that the Zeno brothers, yes, the famous Venetian ones who discovered Frisland, might never have left the Mediterranean. There's no conclusive evidence their 14th century journey even happened. The letters that describe the voyage, possibly written a century later, possibly made up altogether. Fringe theory? A few out-there geographers once claimed Frisland was a real island that had sunk beneath the sea. Not Atlantis style, but something more mundane. Erosion, tectonic shift, whatever helps the narrative float. The Atlantic does have some seamounts and ridges, but nothing in Frisland's alleged coordinates matches up. Still, it's a comforting story. The idea that maybe, just maybe, it was real. Once. Historians still argue whether any version of Frisland ever existed at all. Some cling to the idea of a misunderstood landmass. Others say it was nothing more than Renaissance fan fiction. Most agree that by the mid-1600s, too many credible navigators had sailed through its supposed waters and found only more water. But the legend lingered. You're standing now in the cramped quarters of a London-based mapmaker's apprentice in 1662. His hands are stained with ink. He's carving a new globe. His mentor insists Frisland must stay on it. Don't question the sources, the older man mutters. If Mercator included it, so shall we. You want to scream. You want to point out that hundreds of sailors had seen nothing in that space. But the apprentice simply nods and carves another outline. Gentle even, familiar. The same curved coastline, the same bay. Frisland, reborn again in polished wood and brass. Because to remove it now would mean admitting they'd all been wrong. Back on your imagined deck, the mood is quiet. You've sailed directly through the coordinates where Frisland is supposed to be. Twice. The crew now jokes about renaming this section of sea Frisland Gap. Someone sketches a joke map on a piece of biscuit. Frisland, population 0, featuring landmarks like Mount You Wish and Lake Probably Not. And yet, no one throws out the maps. Not even now. Because history, like the sea, doesn't erase things cleanly. It wears them down, softens the outlines, lets them fade. But a name, like Frisland, it doesn't sink, it floats, just beyond the fog. The calendar flips to the late 1700s. You're standing in a bookshop in Amsterdam, wrapped in candle smoke and the musty scent of pressed parchment. A heavy leather-bound atlas rests on a wooden table. You flip through its pages slowly. Oceans, continents, mythical beasts in the margins. And there, on a map of the North Atlantic, Frisland still lingers. Faint, smaller now. Off to the side like an embarrassed guest who doesn't want to leave the party. Frisland is dying, but not gone. By the mid to late 18th century, more and more navigators were returning with the same report. No land, no sighting, no sign. And this time, their logs mattered. Maritime records were improving, naval academies were standardizing training, and mapping was shifting from an art of impressions to a science of precision. But cartography had trust issues. It didn't want to admit mistakes, and so Frisland kept showing up, just in case. Real historical fact. As late as 1760, some respected mapmakers, including Thomas Jeffreys, geographer to King George III, still featured Frisland. Often smaller, less detailed, but present, a phantom with legacy status. It wasn't until explorers like James Cook and scientific cartographers like Philippe Boichet began mapping the Arctic with far more accuracy that Frisland began to truly vanish. Their expeditions covered the North Atlantic thoroughly, charting depths, tides, currents. No mystery islands, no secret volcanoes, no cod-filled shores. Just water. Fringe tidbit. A few maps in the late 1700s labelled Frisland as Frisland. a possible attempt to rebrand it before deleting it entirely, like giving a ghost a fresh coat of paint before exorcising it. Some atlases quietly removed it with no comment. Others left a faint outline and added notes like position doubtful or supposed land. You can almost hear the cartographer sighing as he wrote it. Historians still argue why it took so long to erase Frisland. Was it inertia, peer pressure, the weight of tradition, or just an unwillingness to accept that even the most beautiful maps could be wrong? You stand now in the cabin of a French mapping vessel, late 1700s. The captain stares at his charts, finger hovering over the coordinates where Frisland is supposed to be. His crew has sailed through the area 3 times. Clear skies, calm seas, no land. He scratches out the island with a slow, deliberate X. But even then, he doesn't erase the name. He just draws the letters smaller. Back on your imaginary ship, now floating in the 21st century warmth of hindsight, you imagine how many sailors over the centuries passed through this exact stretch of ocean, following dotted lines, trusting engraved coastlines, looking for something that had never been there. It's a strange kind of comfort that so many believed so fiercely in a place born of fog, mistakes, and a good story. And even now, long after it should have disappeared, Frisland still flickers in old globes, in antique shops, in dusty libraries, an island that outlived its own non-existence. You now find yourself deep in the archives of an old European maritime museum. Brass telescopes, faded portraits of men with wind-burned cheeks, and a globe from the early 1800s. You spin it slowly. Iceland, Greenland, and just below them, hovering like a memory someone forgot to erase, Frisland. By now, most maps have stopped including it, but some still refuse to let go. It's always the older editions, the decorative globes, the classroom wall charts that haven't been updated since Napoleon had opinions. Like a typo that keeps getting photocopied for centuries, Frisland endures in the margins. You peer closely. It's smaller than before. No cities this time, no rivers, just a nameless blob. Like a smudge the cartographer didn't have the heart to clean off. And even today, bits of it survive in the strangest places. You're in a Victorian study now, the kind with maps on every wall. A globe sits on a pedestal, and an older gentleman, buttoned to the neck and proud of his sideburns, gestures toward it. "Ah, yes," he says, tapping just below Iceland. "That's Frisland. Used to be quite important." You don't have the heart to correct him, because even now there's something cosy about it. Familiar, a relic of a time when people still thought the world held undiscovered corners. When the unknown was just a short voyage away. And let's be honest, Frisland was more than a cartographic error. It was a canvas. Mapmakers drew it differently each time. Sailors added their own tales, nations claimed it, lost it, renamed it. It was the world's most well-travelled mistake. Your ship now sails through calm seas. The sun hangs low, and there's not a wisp of fog in sight. This exact stretch of ocean was once home to empires on paper, to stories told in taverns, to dreams that arrived in ports soaking wet, convinced they had found something important. The water glistens, innocent and empty, and still, somewhere on an old globe, Frisland waits, small, silent, stubborn. The ship rocks gently as you lean against the rail, staring into an ocean that has long since given up its secrets. And yet somewhere beneath your boots at these very coordinates, Frisland was supposed to be. Not once, not briefly, but over and over for centuries. That's the funny thing about ghost islands. They're not content with just one appearance. They linger, they morph, they sneak into new places. You open a modern sea chart on a tablet, sleek, digital, flawless. No Frisland. But dig a little deeper. Old GIS databases, antique nautical overlays, uncorrected GPS systems still used on legacy ships. And you might still find traces. Some modern marine software still includes hidden references to obsolete hazards, markers without explanation, names without land, warnings where there is nothing to warn about. Real historical fact. A few maritime databases in the early 2000s flagged certain Arctic coordinates as obstructed or unknown seabed structure, in roughly the same area Frisland once haunted. It wasn't an intentional resurrection, it was a glitch, a ghost in the machine, a reminder that the past doesn't always uninstall cleanly. One fringe tale? A commercial fisherman in the North Atlantic once claimed his depth scanner showed a sudden, sharp rise in the seabed, exactly where Frisland should have been. A sonar echo that lasted 5 seconds and never came back. He joked it was the island saying hello, or goodbye. Historians still argue whether our digital tools have truly escaped the influence of historical myths. After all, maps don't erase easily. They embed themselves in archives, in minds, in algorithms. You lean back now, eyes closed, as your ship glides silently over where Frisland was never there. It's peaceful, strangely reverent, as though the sea itself remembers. A school of fish darts below, unaware of the centuries of human imagination that once hovered just above them. They don't care about maps, or names, or the strange European tendency to claim things that weren't there. But we care, because Frisland wasn't just a place, it was a mirror, of curiosity, of overconfidence, of longing. We wanted there to be something there, so we put something there, and then believed it. That belief didn't end when the maps changed. You see it still in modern myths, in UFO sightings, in lost cities and unexplored trenches, in the deep desire to be the one who finds it first, even if what you're finding is just the echo of someone else's mistake. Your ship hums along, GPS quietly chirping, a perfect line over a perfect sea. But if you zoomed in, just for a second, you might still glimpse a grey smudge. Unlabelled, half-deleted, a whisper of Frisland. You're sitting now in a quiet control room on a modern research vessel, somewhere in the icy calm of the North Atlantic. The floor doesn't creak, the walls don't groan, everything is humming with smooth certainty. Satellite-linked screens, digital depth gauges, high-resolution sonar. There's hot coffee in your hand and central heating in the floor. Luxury compared to what Frisland's seekers had. And yet, you're still here, sailing directly over where that imaginary island once stood. The coordinates are perfect. The visibility is crystal clear. The depth charts say there's nothing for hundreds of meters below you. Still, someone on the crew, maybe out of habit, maybe out of superstition, says, "We've just passed over it," like it's an old friend or an old ghost. Because now Frisland is something else. Not a place, not a problem, but a presence, a kind of atmospheric echo. It lives in the silence between map layers, in the margin notes of old charts, in the long curious pause when someone says, "Wait, wasn't there something here?" Real historical fact. In 1971, a group of map collectors hosted a symposium in Lisbon to discuss the legacy of Phantom Islands. Frisland was their star exhibit. One speaker even joked that it had the most impressive diplomatic career of any landmass that never existed, having been claimed, mapped, named, and gently retired, all without ever rising above sea level. Fringe tidbit? A GPS art collective once used Frisland's old coordinates to draw the island into the ocean using sailboats and tracking devices. The movement patterns spelled out its old outline on digital maps. It was part tribute, part performance, part quiet rebellion against perfection. Historians still argue whether Frisland should be remembered as a mistake or a metaphor. Did it mislead, or did it inspire? Did it deceive, or did it reveal something deeper about how we see the world? Not as it is, but as we hope it to be. You look at the water now, completely still, a sheet of polished steel. Beneath it, no volcanic mass, no ancient civilization, no cod-rich harbours, just ocean, and yet your mind keeps tracing its imagined shoreline, the one you've seen in so many maps, the one etched still somewhere in the collective human brain, because Frisland, for all its falseness, was never just a lie. It was a placeholder for curiosity, for ambition, for the irresistible lure of the unknown. Your ship passes over the last known coordinates one final time. Nothing. Perfectly, wonderfully, mysteriously nothing. By now you've circled the Arctic ghost more times than you can count. You know every version of its coastline, every mythical port, every coordinate where someone once thought land would rise from the sea like a sleeping giant. But all you've found is air, water, and the soft murmur of the past. Still, there's one last strange twist. Some modern shipping software, especially legacy systems running on older marine vessels, still carries buried references to Frisland, not on main screens, not on current maps, but in data layers that haven't been fully updated in decades you wouldn't even notice unless you dug deep. One such record? A 1994 North Sea Hazard Report contained a brief line. Obstructed sea surface. Coordinates match historical Frisland location. No obstruction confirmed. That's the digital equivalent of a shrug. And yet there it is. Frisland blinking once more before fading back into the digital fog. Real historical fact. The National Maritime Museum in the UK maintains a massive digital database of historical charts, and within it are at least 14 maps listing Frisland, dated across 3 centuries. Not one of them is annotated as incorrect. They're just there, frozen in time as if waiting to be consulted again. Fringe tidbit. A satirical geography journal once proposed naming this phenomenon the Frisland effect, when belief outlasts evidence, and a non-existent place takes up more space in our imaginations than a real one ever could. They used it to explain everything from internet rumours to misremembered movie plots. Geography meets psychology. Historians still argue about what Frisland really tells us. Was it a cautionary tale, a study in stubbornness, or something more comforting? The idea that there might still be surprises in a world that seems completely mapped. Because even now, the more we explore, the more we digitize, the more thoroughly we measure every inch of Earth, the more nostalgic we become for the blanks, for those mysterious margins labelled terra incognita, for places where "here be dragons" wasn't a warning, but an invitation. You walk the deck one last time. The ship is quiet. The sea is gentle. Somewhere off to starboard, a cloud bank rolls in, and you almost see a jagged coastline in its folds. But it's just weather, you know that. And yet, part of you still hopes. Because what if Frisland was never about geography? What if it was about permission, to believe, to explore, to imagine something just beyond what's provable? What if the greatest value of a fake island was that, for 300 years, it made people look a little closer? You pull your coat tighter and smile. Because even if the island was never real, the questions it raised about truth, belief, and the maps we draw inside our heads most certainly are. And those questions, they never disappear. The water is smooth now, like black silk drawn tight. The sky hangs low and heavy, a deep charcoal dome that blurs into the sea. You're standing on the final stretch of this quiet voyage, hovering in the exact place where Frisland never was. It feels right somehow that the wind has stilled, as if the world knows you've come to the edge of the myth. No one speaks on board. The old maps have been folded, the sextant stored away. Only the sound of a gentle engine hum remains, and your thoughts, which are softer now, more stretched out, like the silence itself is expanding. You remember how it began, an island born from ink and error, a ghost that sailed alongside real ships. For centuries it was passed hand to hand, drawn and redrawn, claimed, believed in, defended. It wore many shapes, gathered stories, picked up neighbours, and at one point it even had a volcano. That's commitment. And now nothing remains. No cities, no ports, not even a rock to stand on. Just this place, this flat, endless calm. Real historical fact? The name Frisland still appears in some geological databases as a historical reference, even though the island never existed. A footnote to a footnote. Proof that even when we delete something, it leaves a faint shadow behind. Fringe detail? In 2017, an Icelandic art project invited schoolchildren to redraw Frisland however they imagined it. The results? Floating forests, a palace made of ice. One map showed Frisland as a giant sleeping dog. It was beautiful, how children restored something that never was, simply because they could. Historians still argue how to categorise Frisland. A hoax, a mistake, or something else entirely. A vessel for our need to fill in the blanks. The human refusal to leave a space empty. Because Frisland was never just a location, it was a symbol of exploration, of error, and of everything we still don't know. The fact that we held on to it so long, that we wanted to believe in it, says more about us than it does about the sea. So you close your eyes now, and the ship fades around you. The maps blur, the cold drifts away, and Frisland slips gently into sleep. Not vanished, not gone, just resting beneath the waves of memory. And whether you remember it tomorrow or not, it'll still be there, in some library, on some old globe, in some quiet corner of your imagination. Waiting, wind down, 300 words. Now, as we bring this long, gentle journey to a close, let the waves grow even slower in your mind. Let the sea settle, the fog stretch thin and distant, and the ghostly island of Frisland dissolve fully into the quiet. You are safe. You are still. The maps have stopped spinning. The ocean no longer calls you forward. There's nothing left to search for, only stillness, only warmth, only the soft rhythm of breath and sleep. The stars are dimming, the sky softening into velvet. You're wrapped in layers now, not of wool or cloth, but of stories, of dreams, of calm. Everything imagined, everything forgotten, everything unneeded, drifts away like mist. There are no questions here, no more winds to chase, no more coordinates to check. The sea has become a mirror, and in it you see only peace. If you're still awake, let your body relax just a little more. Let your fingers loosen, your jaw soften, your eyelids grow heavier. Let the thought of Frisland fade like the last ripple of a forgotten tide. You've travelled far tonight, not across oceans, but through wonder, through history, through the quiet corridors of human imagination. And now, it's time to rest. So sleep, traveller. The map is folded, the sea is still, and the island is sleeping too.